and how are you? It is a horrible day here today. It's quite mild, 7 degrees, but we've got a bit of wind coming through and it's been howling all night long, and it is just the tiniest bit of rain is starting to fall, but hopefully that will hold out. Now, Easter is coming, and can I convince you that I've just been to the hen house to pick out some freshly laid eggs? Of course I can't, but what I have been doing is going up into the loft and just seeing what Easter decorations I want to bring down to put around at home, but also half a mind as to what I might be ready to give away, so to donate to the charity shop. And in fact, I've already put some eggs in my pile for donation, and they were little papier-mâché looking eggs, white with a green print, almost looked like shamrocks on them, and some blue ones and some orange as well. I decided they didn't really go with my colour palette, so I'm going to, my palette is sort of more natural looking eggs, and I particularly like these ones. They're all plastic, but they look like those little chocolate mini eggs, so sort of more naturalistic in style. But having said that, I can see I've got a glittery muted pink and some yellow and white ones as well. So I was going to bring my hot glue gun out and add those to my door wreath, but as it's just started raining, I have packed the extension cord and everything away, and I will probably finish off my wreath indoors. So if you are watching live, can you hear that wind starting to roar? Leave me the hashtag live, and if you're watching on replay later on, leave me the hashtag replay. Now, I've got some quite exciting news. If you've been following me for a while, you will have known that I went to the live filming of the BBC Antiques Roadshow last year at Belmont House, which is about 5 miles away from us. And in years gone by, I've actually hosted flower arranging classes at Belmont House when we've had a tour with the head gardener and then been allowed to pick flowers from the herbaceous border. And then they set us up a little marquee in the walled garden. And then we had a beautiful flower arranging workshop. I say I'm sure I did that 2 or 3 times. So I've got some blog posts, I think, that give a sort of diary entry of what I did. And I'll see whether I can find those, and I will post those in my free Facebook group, Flowers Start World. Good morning, Joan. It's nice to see you here. So I had all that excitement of watching Antiques Roadshow on Sunday afternoon and not really paying attention to the programme because I was busy looking for myself. I knew which shot I was in if I was going to be in a shot. It was the item on the Trinidadian art, the 2 sisters. And luckily for me, I was there just positioned so you can see me between the 2 sisters. And as I say, I didn't really listen to what was going on in the show because I was busy spotting everybody else that I recognised in town. So it was a spot your neighbour kind of thing going on. And then even more exciting, well, equally as exciting, I was watching one of my favourite YouTubers, Lady Mary Beth. And I'd had a bit of sometimes you have a hard day, don't you? And I'd had a bit of a hard day, so I'd taken myself off to a quiet place in the house with a cup of tea, and I thought, I'm going to watch this video. It's quite a long video, 45 minutes. And I nearly spat my tea out because I get a mention, not only one mention about my Burley pottery visit, a second mention about my tour of the world of Wedgwood, but a third mention when Lady Mary Beth shares a little joke with me saying how I don't like the Wedgwood jasperware. So I have linked Lady Mary Beth's video in the description under this one if you want to go and have a look, and if you want to check out the 2 videos she name checks me for, they're also linked in the description down below. Can you hear the rain starting to fall? So on with today's show. So do you remember that a couple of weeks ago I made my viburnum tinus door wreath? So this was viburnum that had been cut from my friend's garden, and I always have to add a little bit of ribbon on the top because of where the hook is on my front door. If I hung it just like that on my front door, it would look too high up and look a bit out of place. So I always hang a little bit of a ribbon on so it just drops the wreath down a little bit. And I happen to know that this wreath has been replicated, and if you'd like to see this wreath and who made it, check out the free Facebook group Flower Start World, and there's a link for that in the show notes underneath the video. So I thought, rather than taking this wreath apart, and it was made on a really tiny metal frame, a single little metal rod going around, I thought actually, as I put all the greenery on, that might make a good base to add more greenery on the top and fluff it out a little bit, ready for the Easter and the spring season. And what I'm going to use is my Scots pine. So I know that I've previously talked about how Scots pine looks like a really Christmas greenery, but the thing is, I had this from the vase arrangement. Do you remember the vase arrangement I made as a hand-tied bouquet, and I put it in my Wedgwood vase? Well, I threw all the greenery away last week, and actually I put the Scots pine in my compost bin, and I was just emptying my little mini compost bin into our brown bin outside because it's been collection day for the compost. And I thought, actually, I'm going to save some of those bits. And I also had some more that was cut, and we've got a topiary tree planted on our front porch, and I'd left these sort of extra bits of branches over the edge of the pot to sort of dress the top of the pot. And I thought, well, it's now or never. Why don't I refresh my viburnum tinus wreath, which although looks okay, but when I hold it up close, you can see that the flower heads have died off and it's all starting to shrivel. So I thought I might as well use these bits of greenery, and perhaps, these haven't been cut from my garden, they've been cut from a friend's garden, but it may be that you've got something similar in your garden, and if you've made a wreath, that it might be ready for a bit of a refresh. And with Easter coming, that if you like to change your door wreath seasonally, the perfect opportunity to do it in the run up to Easter. And of course, for us here in the UK, it is Mother's Day, Mothering Sunday, on this Sunday coming. So I think I'm right in saying that the 40 days of Lent is Mothering Sunday, the halfway point, but on a Sunday. And in the olden days, it was when the staff in the big stately homes were allowed to go home and visit their mothers. I don't quite know my English folklore here, but perhaps I will have to look it up. Or if you're online at the moment, have a Google and find out what the historical connection, the background is for Mothering Sunday. I know if you live in the United States and I think mainland Europe, that your Mother's Day is in May, I think, but ours is always in that Lent period. I think actually, as I talk about, is that when the simnel cake, you take the simnel cake home to your mother? I'm not entirely sure, because we always ate simnel cake, which is like a lighter version of a Christmas cake, but with a marzipan layer inside it. And then my mum used to put marzipan balls around the top, 12 of them indicating the 12 apostles, and then we always had white royal icing inside, and then a scattering of Easter chicks and Easter eggs. But we always ate that on Easter Sunday itself. It wasn't something, and you wouldn't want to eat it partway through Lent, would you? Because that would be going against the whole Lent purpose. Anyway, I'm probably mixing all my folklores and metaphors up. So if you are online, why don't you correct me? And what I'll do is I'll have a look online as well, and I'll post what I find in the Facebook group. So without further ado, I'm going to bring the camera angle down, and then you can see what I'm going to do. So the tools with me today, I've got my secateurs nice and sharp, and my floristry scissors, and then I have got my floristry wire. So these, you may well know, if you make a door wreath regularly, and Christmas door wreath perhaps, is mossing wire. So I'm going to keep my wire on one long reel and try and go all the way around. And the reason I've got two reels is because they're both part used, and I'm just conscious of the fact that I might run out halfway through. So I will bring you down so you can have a look and see what I am doing. Move that out of the way, and then perhaps you can have a look at my lovely Easter eggs there in the corner. Bring my chair out, and I don't know whether you can you hear the rain starting to patter down? So we have the pergola up above, but I think also it's starting to catch on this vinyl tablecloth that's protecting our patio table. And also we've got our canna lilies. have been wrapped up in big black sacks to protect them from the frost over the winter months, and I can hear the rain splattering off that as well. So I'm going to keep my ribbon at the top of my wreath and then tie on with my little bit of wire here. So that just goes around the bottom, and then I twist the cut end of the wire with the wire that's on the reel and just twist the two ends together so that it all holds in place. Now I'm just hoping I think I am going to have enough to go around here. Oh, good. I'm pleased you can't hear the rain, because I certainly can, Joan. And now I've got a slightly wet, cool bottom as well as I sit down on my patio chair. Normally I remember to bring out a towel or something to sit on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move those out of the way to get a nice little production line going. And I'm going to cut down my greenery. So you could use any greenery for this. And out of preference, would I be using Scots pine? Probably not, because I just think it says Christmas rather than Easter. But it's what I had to hand, and I thought it was pointless me putting this into the compost bin and then, going out to cut something else. So I'm cutting these. I always cut everything the same length, distance between thumb and forefinger, just as a ready measure. And this tufty bit here looks really nice, but it's too big, so I'm going to measure it up and cut into it. And I cut diagonally into it there. Can you see? Because it means that if I really, really run out of greenery, I could use the other end of the greenery as well. So I've cut that one bit in two. If you go straight across, if I show you, can I fool you that was a nice bit of greenery to use? But if I cut straight across, you end up with this tufty bit here. What greeneries do I associate with Easter? Well, I'm not entirely sure I can answer that, Joan. All I would say is I don't particularly associate the Christmas pine with Easter. That's why I'm sort of saying that's not normally what I'd use. But in terms of what I would use, if you had more viburnum tinus, and it's look, I'm looking around my garden now thinking, what have I actually got in season? So you want something that's quite robust, because it's got to hold up out of water, and something you've got plentiful of in your garden. It could be, the thing I do have in my garden is quite a lot of the ivy, not the bushy ivy, but the trailing ivy. And I might make a door wreath and attach the trailing ivy around. And in fact, it would probably end up looking a little bit like that. You just want this sort of green haze to use as the beginning of your wreath. So I would say, yes, that's what I might use. And how about you, Joan? If I bounce that question back to you, what have you got in your garden that you think you could use? You don't want to use anything that's going to flop, so nothing too delicate. You don't want to use anything, I would say, what I wouldn't use is the fresh greenery. When your plants are just coming into leaf, at this time of the year, the new growth is really bright. It's like a lime green colour, really, really shiny bright. But that will just flop, and you'll talk about, you hear flower rangers talking about waiting till their greenery has hardened off. And quite often here for me in the southeast of England, my fresh grown greenery doesn't harden off until June time, really. So I don't really want to have my pine cones on there. I'm trying to put everything in the right level round. So I'm thinking now, I thought I had loads of this pine, and now I'm cutting it and obviously discarding the chunky stems that are going to be too big to use. I'm thinking, have I actually got enough to go round? So what I might do is change the position of my ribbon. I might suddenly decide that actually I'm just going to use this pine as like an accent detail, and I may well be afterwards scrabbling around in my compost bin, which is just down off the side. Yeah, we're in agreement there then, Joan. Yeah, not that new greenery. So I would say that, yeah, viburnum tinus would be good. And what I sometimes do, because the viburnum tinus, once the blossoms have gone over and it starts to dry, I might even, crop the viburnum tinus so I've got all the greenery in, but I may well go back in and actually cut the flowers off because they're not going to last. So that might be one way round of doing it. So there, I've managed to get those 2 bits off the top, and then this bit is quite chunky, and I can, instead of me with the other bits I've been putting in the bin, that bit might be quite handy to use. Bay. We've used bay before, haven't we? So I have only just this morning actually thrown my bay wreath away, which we made, I think we did that for Valentine's Day. And I've actually put that in my general waste bin because I made it on really strong floristry wires, and I thought I don't really want to be unwinding all of that. So I couldn't put it in the compost bin because it's got wire in there as well. So I've put it in the general household waste bin, which these days we hardly seem to have any rubbish. Recycling we do, and the days when we used to have rabbits and chickens, when they'd eat all our sort of vegetable kitchen waste, we hardly get any rubbish at all, any waste at all. So here we go. I'm on my wreath here, and then I'm going to be working this way around my wreath. So I'm holding up my first bit of greenery and then winding it round. And you just want to make sure that you've wound it on sufficiently strongly that it's not going to fall off. So it's, a little bit of a waggle. And I think actually I'm going to go quite sparse with this. So I haven't got loads of greenery. So instead of doing, quite often what I do with my greenery on a door wreath is I put one bit flat in the middle of the door wreath, and then I bring one bit sort of going to the outside edge, and then another bit going on the inside edge. So each placement has got 3 mini bits to it and go around. And you can see that gives you something nice and chunky. But because I don't have lots of the pine, I think I'm going to start off just going with one thickness round, and then it'll give me somewhere to nestle in my Easter eggs when I'm ready to add those in. Going around like that. It really does sound like now, I don't think it is actually raining heavily, but it certainly sounds like it is. It's like when if you've ever been camping, and that noise that you get when you're lying in your tent at night and you've got that rain bouncing off the canvas. It feels a little bit like that. And my hands are really quite cold. You'll notice that I haven't got my gloves on today, and that's because I'm having my gel nail polish taken off today. So I've had 4 weeks of being ultra careful with my nails and trying to get them to last a long time. So it's the first time I've had my nails gelled, and I don't know whether I will do it again, whether the gel is for me or not. So it's just giving here another little bit of texture and livening up the wreath a little bit. So it's covering up these dead bits of the viburnum blossom. And the leaves themselves, the viburnum tinus leaves, again, they've dried out, they've gone a tiny bit crinkly. I could try and convince myself that they look a little bit like dried bay leaves. So they are quite robust, but close inspection, you may be mistaken for thinking, oh, what's all that dead stuff on Julie's wreath? But when you look at this from afar, from walking up to my front door, what you will see will be, a plain front door with this beautiful circle of something that's seasonal. So it's about me creating something. It might not be the best stories ever, but I've had some time to be creative, some time on my own. Of course, I'm talking to you, and also I'm outdoors, and I know that I'm talking about being a little bit cold. But if I was sitting indoors all day, I wouldn't be noticing what the weather was like. And I do like to just notice, and that's all about being mindful, engaging the senses, and noticing what's happening around you. And I think especially those of us who are flower arrangers and enjoy doing things with creative things with natural plant materials, it makes you look as well. So when, next time I'm walking into town, I'll be looking at other people's wreaths on their front doors, thinking, oh yes, I've still noticed Christmas door wreaths up. I walked to a friend's house the other day through a new housing estate to go and visit a friend, and lots of lovely door wreaths up. So I think people are increasingly doing year-round door wreaths or making their Christmas door wreaths last a little bit longer. You can see there. It does give a nice sort of second layer. It's tidying things up a little bit here. And I'll be spotting things, you know, growing in people's gardens. So I have just bought some daffodils from the supermarket. And I will, you know, you sort of, it's like when you learn a new word and suddenly you see that word everywhere. And I think if you notice your plant material that you're using, it makes you observe, a keener observer of what's happening around you, whether that's being out in the wild or whether it's what other people have got growing in their gardens or what they're doing in terms of their decor, in terms of the fresh flowers they might have bought. And there might be vases of flowers in the windows of the houses you walk past. So I should say at this point that I live in an historic market town, and there's lots of medieval buildings built right onto the edge of the pavement, but also it's a town where most of the properties are Victorian terraces. So they're right up on the pavement. So for my American viewers, I think you call a road a pavement. So it's the where you walk as a pedestrian is the pavement. So you can quite easily see into people's gardens. We don't have the front of people's houses. I don't live somewhere where there are lots of long drives and the houses are hidden from view. So it's quite nice, especially at Christmas time, when people tend to leave their curtains open. And you can admire the Christmas trees as well. Actually, I quite like it. Joan's asking there, have I ever used fresh flowers in a door wreath? I will say that I have used fresh flowers in a door wreath when I made a traditional door. If I make a traditional door wreath using moss at the bottom, I have put fresh flowers in that. I've put roses in those, and you can just slide the roses direct into your moss and they will hold up. But if you're wanting to put fresh flowers into your door wreath, one way of doing it, especially at this time of the year, is to make a feature of the bulbs. You know, the potted, for instance, the potted Tate daffodils, that you could unpot them, wash the bulbs, so you've got, you know, a nice clean bulb and nice clean roots, and then add those into your door wreath. You could put test tubes in. You just need to make sure that you probably want the test tubes, or the, let's call them orchid tubes. So when you buy your orchids from the florist, or your anthuriums, you know, they're sort of heart-shaped, they come in a little plastic tube with a little cap on the top, so it keeps the water in. The thing you need to bear in mind is, if you've got your wreath and you've got your test tubes in, you're going to have to make sure your test tubes are all pointing downwards, and you won't be able to, you know, so what do you do when you get to the top? You're going to have to make sure that they're tucked in, and that might mean that you have to make a door wreath that is a little bit chunkier in order that you can nestle your test tubes into your wreath, but keeping them horizontal so they don't fall out. And yes, a living wreath. Well, a living wreath can also be planted wreaths as well. You can get, well, certainly at one time you could get, it's almost like a papier-mâché wreath. So it'd be like a trough, like a window box that was in a circle, and then you could plant that out. So a bit like how you do your, you know, your hanging baskets or something like that. You could actually plant your container out, but that would be good on the flat. But if you want to, the difficulty is that when you've got something you want to hang on your front door, that it needs to hang vertically. So whatever you're doing on the table as you're working, well, everything's going to be perfectly fine because it's all flat. But as soon as you then lift it up to put on your door, you've got to make sure it doesn't all fall apart. And sometimes when I'm making the wreaths, if I'm making them for myself, I do the greenery on the table, but when I come and do the decoration, sometimes I will actually hang the wreath on my front door and do the adding the decorations in when I'm standing up, so I can sort of see how they sit, how they naturally want to lie. Because sometimes you can get it looking perfect on the table, and then when you, as I say, lift it up, it all moves around a little bit. So I think actually with that one single layer of pine, I have just managed to get round. So I'm back at that tricky bit at the beginning where I have to, you know, I think, oh, I've just got one more piece to go in there. But when you get to that stage when you think I've just got one more bit to go, normally there's about 3 more bits to go. So the little tip is there. but I need to make sure that I lift up that first bit of greenery and then slide in my last couple of pieces so that the little stubby ends of my pine sit under the full part. So I'm just tucking that last bit in, and then as I'm fastening that last bit, just making sure I'm not flattening the fronds of the pine. And I would say, aren't I fabulous? Bob's your uncle. I've managed to go all the way around without a problem. So you can see on the back it looks different. I was, concentrating on the front. So cut off, and then what I do then is, you can't see this, so I'll just tell you, I'm running my wire underneath the bindings. And in fact, if I hadn't tied off that wire to start with so neatly, I could have tied the two loose ends together. I didn't think about that. So I'm just going to, it's a bit like sewing this bit. You just want to make sure it's not going to unravel, but also the cut end of your wire, when you've finished twisting and tightening in place, you need to push it back inside in order that it doesn't then scratch your front door. So let's have a look and see what we've got. I'm looking slightly wet, as you can see. So it's just a tiny little bit of a revamp. So that's the back. We're not going to see that, but I've just got a little bit more freshness on the top. So I'm thinking that no one's going to come to my front door and say, what on earth is that woman doing with her Christmas greenery on her spring front door? I'm just hoping that it looks slightly fresher than it did before, and I've just given myself a few more pockets where I can get my hot glue gun out and add in my little bit, my bits of Easter egg. So what I'm going to do first, when I've finished filming, so I'm probably going to use these ones first. I haven't got any little strings on them, and then see how I go, whether I actually want to cut the little ribbons off, because once I've done that, the sort of I won't be able to hang them on my Easter tree. If I change my mind and want to do something next year, well, I could always glue the ribbons back on. So Joan's saying you'll have a job getting it off. Yes. Well, I'm sort of pushing that, Joan. I'm pushing that off for another day, really. Yes, I am going to have a go at getting this off. But it may well be, come July, when I do a summer wreath, I might just go over the top again, and it might become chunkier and chunkier. But yes, eventually I will have to think what I'm going to do about taking it off. So the first lot of binding I did with viburnum tinus, I did it with string, in order that I could just cut round the back, and then all the string, the bits of string offcuts and the viburnum tines could go straight in the compost bin. Of course, I can't do that now. And when I want to, start again, I'm going to have to get my floristry scissors to cut through these bits of wire, and then separate out my cut bits of wire to go in the bin, and then put the rest in the compost heap. But as you say, Joan, what I could do, and I do think it's quite good fun, is I could spray paint it all, and I like doing that. So lay a sheet out onto the patio or onto the garden, pick a day when it isn't raining, a can of spray paint, and cover it. And again, that gives a really good look, makes it look really stylish. So sometimes at Christmas I spray my Christmas doorways white afterwards, and sort of a bit of whiteness into the new year. If you were having a party, with a themed colour, you could, spray it all fuchsia pink or gold. Perhaps for the Oscars, I could have sprayed it gold and then sort of celebrated in that way. So there's always lots of options. But yes, eventually I will have to think about taking it apart, and I won't be throwing this one in the bin like I did with my pine wreath, because this is actually on a pre-formed skinny metal frame, and I definitely don't want to be throwing that away, because I bought it and there's nothing wrong with it. I will just at some point in the future need to sit down as part of my sort of household duties, in terms of keeping all my flower stuff clean. I do my decluttering, and I sort of recycle what I've made, and that'll be something to do on a dull Friday afternoon, or perhaps I'll sit in the kitchen and have this on a tablecloth and have a film on, something like that. I can see something's dangling down here. Notice that there? I think I'm going to cut that out, and as I stand up, I'm just noticing there's another piece of pine that's fell on the patio, so I could have had a tiny bit more. So if anything, it looks a bit unbalanced. Again, when I hang it up on my Christmas story on my front door, I can always just snip a little bit. Oh, do you mean the hubcap rings, Joan? You're looking for, and because you again, it's getting your eye in. You'll see something. You're bound to see it. You know, when you're walking into town or something like that, there'll be a lone hubcap that's just pinged off. So I normally pick all of it up, and I throw the plasticky bit in the bin and just keep the metal bit. But as you saw with my wreath, I think I had my rubber gloves on that day, and my rubber gloves have still got a stain across them, even though I've been using them for washing up, because they are really, really dirty. But you know, part of working with flowers and doing your bits is it's not necessarily a clean activity, but just be aware that they are quite dirty. It's the brake dust, I suppose, isn't it? And just all the stuff that goes on with having a car. So I am going to say goodbye. I certainly need to warm up, but what I am going to do is I'm going to go indoors, put the kettle on, heat the hot glue gun up, and then I'm going to glue in some of my little eggs, and then I'll post a picture. I'll do it on the community tab pages here on YouTube, but I will put most of my pictures on my Facebook group, Flower Start World. So join me there. And what I'll do is I will see you next week, same time, same place, 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And don't forget that I do always send out a pre-recorded video on a Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And what else do I do? Facebook Live in my group at noon on a Friday. And I also run Zoom flower classes, which takes place on a Tuesday at noon as well. So those of you who are in my Zoom classes at the moment, I will see you in a few hours' time. That's all for me for now. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Oh, I'll be glad to get... Oh, I found another bit of greenery here as well. I could have filled things out a little bit. Never mind.